All right, so it's coming live here. Um, don't even know if I put this one as public or private, or if it's live or unlive. But I'm wanting to get a few thoughts out here, so I hope hope it works out either way. Um, this is the problem that we have right now. You're going to think first off, you're going to think, what does a trucker know about something like this, or how could one person know about something like this, or be there's a lot of people who've been studying this for a long time, including me. I'm not a scientist. I'm someone who follows and puts together all the pieces, and mainstream science actually they stop each other from being able to tell the truth. So the people who are right now scientists, if they publish a paper even that's against what the mainstream says, it won't get out. So it's actually better to hear this from somebody who has an objective opinion, can put the pieces together, but who's not curtailed by losing their license to be in the scientific community or lose their tenure at a college somewhere. That's part of the problem with scientists. They can't speak their mind. They can't tell you what's going on. For a long time, we've been conditioned with all the movies through Hollywood about, what would happen during a pole reversal, what would happen, when the poles flip, or if what they're not really getting at. It's not even about the poles flipping. The one pole's been going towards Siberia at a breakneck pace, and it's actually getting faster. I don't know if Chernobyl had anything to do with that, but I do know that the people who before were saying we don't know when it's going to happen are now saying it's happening. They just dropped a video from the one lady who's in this video, who's a scientist in Canada, who now says a different story than what she was singing a few years ago. So I'm going to play this in a sec, but I want to go over a couple things. The power outage out in California was a test run. It's conditioning you to get used to the fact that you're going to lose a lot more power than that. They're talking about being able to shut down the whole grid out there just for some wind. Wind doesn't make fire. You need a spark. And it was started by a garbage truck with something on fire in it that they dumped out there in a field that was ready for primed for fire. They do use controlled burns and stuff, but this was something different. This was some kind of setup just to have a reason. So they shut off all the power. Okay. Well, now they're saying in open court that in an overabundance of caution, which it did nothing this time, but they're going to plan to shut it off for the entire state, the entire grid, 16 million people. They are the biggest power supplier, but they're tied into a network that they can shut off everybody's power, even if other power companies wouldn't be in charge. It's not even political, because they have the person in office, the governor there, they gave his money to have him elected. It's not even political. This is conditioning for an event. I'm going to put up links to this, and this will make sense, and we will follow why this is now a pressing thing, and why I'm right. It's not just about me being right. It's all the scientists that are actually doing good work on this on the sidelines and putting it up in different papers and publishing it in hidden places that are telling the truth, and it's not getting out. Not far and wide. They're not putting it all together in a big package with a bow where you can understand it. They're letting it out in dribbles and drabbles. That's how they do. So right now you're being conditioned to get used to, and I appreciate the like, to get used to power outages. Okay? And it's because our Earth's magnetosphere is weaker. It's way weaker. We are going through a solar minimum. Okay? Minimum. A grand solar minimum, because we're coming out of the maximum. We're going through a place in our galaxy, around the center of the galaxy, that is filled with a big stream that goes around from the center, out of the jet of the black hole, that comes around, and all kinds of gamma rays and stuff are hitting us anyways. But when it seems like in the Milankovitch cycles, and if you're talking about a Maunder minimum, but in those cycles, when the sun has less output, for some reason it always seems to magically correlate with the Earth's magnetosphere being a little weaker. And with the pole having moved so much now, they've actually several different times had to change runway designations, change GPS settings on airplanes to land them. And they have for a long time been having our military to train to use flight controls, land and take off, and navigate with 0 GPS, which is why I've told people, I can put a link to that other video. You can't trust it because the satellites can be taken out even by a coronal mass ejection, CME. And we've been playing Russian roulette with the sun for a long time, and we just missed quite a few of these. Here's the problem. The next one that comes out, mathematically, when you do the numbers, is more likely to hit us because we've already missed the other ones that were shooting out at a distance that if we were 3 months ahead in our rotation or revolution around the sun, we would have hit it dead on, and it would have taken out everything, not just our satellites, because they're in low Earth orbit, they're still protected by our magnetosphere, but everything on the ground would have fried. All of our telegraph, well, forget about telegraph, we don't use those, but all of our electrical lines, which are the same thing. When the one hit a long time ago, okay, well, I mean, not too long ago, back in the 80s, I think it was, into 2000s, they had a different event, but I think it was the 80s that Canada got hit and it knocked out a lot of their power grid. Well, back in the, I want to say it was, man, it was in the 1800s maybe. We had telegraph wires across the United States, and they were catching on fire, and so they unplugged the telegraph from power, but they were still able to use them because they were still charged. That's how much was coming through our shielding, if you call it that, or magnetosphere. That's because of a really big coronal mass ejection that hit our Earth. Right now we are weak. Right now our magnetosphere is so weak because the pole is moving, but it's also something is making our magnetosphere so weak that now, instead of looking for X-class flares to the 10th, 100th, or 1000th power, okay, we're not even worried about X classes, we're worried about M classes. They just had an M class flare. I know you're not up on this, that's okay. I'll put up a video of a guy who explains the chart. I've got pictures of the chart that I keep in my phone, but because if they talk about a flare, I want to know what they're talking about. But now we're worried about M class flares taking out all of our infrastructure. The only way you can protect it is to shut it off like the telegraph operators did. They're going to shut off power when this happens. It could be into the wintertime. It doesn't have to be the summertime. Appreciate the like. It doesn't have to be in the summertime. It could be at any time. This is not just a fire season thing. We're being conditioned to get used to losing power, and they're probably going to do it in other states too. It's not just going to be a California thing. I'm fully expecting it to be that they might shut it down for 3 days, because it's about a 3-day period that when a coronal mass ejection happens, or any type of radiation from space, because the space we're going through right now is highly charged, and we're talking gamma rays, we're talking really, really rough stuff. That's why the higher cancer rates and stuff, but also, well, a lot of that's in the chemicals in our water we drink. But right now we have such a weak magnetosphere that anything, even a burst from another star coming in, we would have to take out our power, the numbers, about 3 days for each and every single event. And that's to keep the lines from conducting electricity from the moving particles, photons, carrying light and power, and them charging the lines from above and overloading the system. They had a problem where even when the power was off in a system, they said it was too much for the things to handle in Canada, and it fried everything. So, and here's the problem with this: all of the transformers on all of the poles all across the United States, they don't just make those like candy. They don't grow on trees. It takes them a while to make them. So what we're looking at is a problem that it would take about 10 years to come back from. And that's not saying the sky is falling. That's not that's a conservative estimate. It's 10 years. They're all saying that. The substations, it's not like we have a great warehouse all over the place in different places with all of these extra transformers. You see them move, you see us deliver them. There's no big warehouse in each area that has lots of them. That's why they have to have power companies be drug in little trucks that with service guys from, like, there could be a power outage in South Carolina. People come all the way from Louisiana because they need that much help working on them to make the power come back on quicker, right? They don't have transformers to be provided for all of these states. Not even close, not even one. We don't have a warehouse full of transformers, and the big substations are the worst. Those are the ones we do not. It takes so long to make them because they're wound by hand. That copper inside of them has to be inspected, by eye and by hand, and they have to be perfect, or they could short out within themselves. The outside wall of the casing of the transformer, you don't want it to short out on that, and you don't want the wires too close together. So, because there's a positive side and a negative side, even if it's one big long line of wire. So it could short out within itself, and it could cause heat and then a fire, and the whole thing burns up. So I'm gonna play a little bit of this, and I'm gonna show you this woman who's been covering this, and this is why I'm doing this now. There's a woman that's in Canada who's a scientist, and she's the one she was very, very conservative in this. Then she talks about in another video how she's saying goodbye North Pole. The North Pole is going to Russia. We're going to have to change a lot, and it's not just here's the thing too. Birds have a hard time. They use our magnetic Earth's frequency to fly north in the summertime and south in the winter for better weather, right? The other day I was seeing, and I mentioned this to somebody else and put it on another channel, there were geese that were honking like crazy. I'm like, man, they're getting loud this year. And they were flying north and west. They were going the wrong way. Then Mike Morales put up a video, and somebody, I think it was him that did the one, somebody else did one too. There were birds. No, this is another guy. This is a new channel I found. I've got to find it. I'll put a link up to his channel. I kind of dig it. There were birds that were flying into a race track glass windows of the, I guess it's where the rich people sit in these booths, right? In their glass walls of this racetrack. All of a sudden, these birds just decided, and they kept repeatedly running themselves into the glass like they were trying to kill themselves. And they never fly that way, ever. Okay? A bunch of whales just breached the water and came out of the water. Somebody else did a video on that, and for no reason, they all just came up at the same time and were going in the wrong direction. It's not just about beached whales and dolphins. They've done some weird stuff for years, but this was a whole bunch of them. So for them all to do that all at the same time, I think it's got a lot to do with our weaker magnetosphere. It's just letting stuff in that it's not supposed to. Even astronauts have known for a long time they've had to fly around this one area of our planet and can't go through it because there's so much less of a magnetosphere. It's dangerous to them. And all of our satellites, we're going to lose all of our satellites. They're going to send up CubeSats. The military will have GPS. We won't have it. So get a map book, like I said before. But I'm going to play this, or I'm just rambling at this point. I mean, I'm getting into it, but
damage cells, cause cancer.
Let's see what we got, if it's in the right place.
Electronic circuits and electrical grids. With a weaker field in place, some scientists think this could expose planes to higher levels of radiation, making flights less safe. This could also disrupt the internal compass of many animals.
See the birds.
Which use the magnetic field for navigation.
I saw that the other day. They were going the wrong way.
It could make certain places on the planet too dangerous to live. But what exactly will take place on the surface is less clear than what will undoubtedly happen in space. Satellites and crewed space missions will need extra shielding that we'll have to provide ourselves.
But we don't.
Intense cosmic and solar radiation will fry circuit boards and increase the risk of cancer.
Look, we don't currently have shielding on our GPS satellites is the issue.
our modern way of life would cease to exist. We know this because we're already seeing a glimpse of this in an area called the South Atlantic Anomaly.
That's where they can't fly over.
Turns out, the direction of a portion of the magnetic field deep beneath this area has already flipped. And scientists say that's one reason why the field has been steadily weakening since 1840. As a result, the Hubble Space Telescope and other satellites often shut down their sensitive electronics as they pass over the area.
Poles have been
And
split.
astronauts on the International Space Station report seeing a higher number of bright flashes of light in their vision, thought to be caused by high-energy cosmic rays that the weaker field can't hold back. Since experts started measuring the anomaly a few decades ago, it has grown in size and now covers a fifth of Earth's surface, with no signs of shrinking anytime soon.
It's growing.
This is so extreme that it could be a sign we're on the brink of a polar flip, or we may already be in the midst of one.
We are.
But scientists remain skeptical, mainly because
the last thing the poles reversed was 780,000 years ago. So it's not, we don't have it on a record.
turns out 780,000 years is over double the time that Earth usually takes between flips.
Since the last mass extinction, there have been reversals roughly every 300,000 years.
Every
So
300,000
what
years.
gives?
Okay.
Well, scientists haven't figured it out yet.
Now, let me go into this real quick. That's the same woman right there. She's saying, oh, it's probably not going to happen, but I want you to see what they just put up from her. I'm going to go into another video real quick. Let's see what we got here. This new video that she put out, and she's in for the Canadian service.
Much weaker.
Okay. And I'm going to skip on this video in a couple places because she gets a little long-winded, but I want you to see this. That she's now singing a completely different tune. You got to hear this same woman. I knew it was her. You got to watch this. They've been lying to us and holding back info, but I want you to see this. Let's see if I can start the very first of it.
There are some things that you just assume will always be the way they are. The North Pole, for one.
This is recent.
Well, not
The
only
other
is
one
that
was
an
about a year
incorrect
or so ago.
assumption of the past, magnetic north is actually on the move right now, shifting away from Canada and towards Siberia. To find out why and what it means for this country, we're joined by science
Same
journalist
woman.
Alana Mitchell. It's just part of the fascinating story told in her book, The Spinning Magnet, the force that created the modern world and could destroy it. And Alana Mitchell joins us now. Boy, that's not a provocative title at all, is it? Holy cow.
Yeah.
The North Pole is moving towards Russia?
It is.
How come?
Well, the magnetic North Pole is moving toward Russia. There are a bunch of them.
There's actually 4 North Poles, right?
Well,
Four, if you're a geographer, that's how you see it.
she's saying 4. There's a magnetic, then there's a geographic, but
Sure.
Let's bring it up and we'll describe it for people.
forget about what she's saying on this part right here. We're going further. I want it to be where she says, let's see. Hang on a second. If I can get to that point.
Grids are, dramatically affected by solar storms. Already, when we have solar storms, we get, outages. You remember the one in Quebec in 1989 that took out the grids for many hours. But if you have a much weaker field, see, when the poles are reversing, the magnetic field goes down to about 10% of
And that's
its usual
what
strength.
everybody-
And so there's extra.
Everybody who's a scientist who studies sun weather right now has been talking about the fact that they're surprised that these M-class flares, which were nothing, I mean, they're big, but they're nothing to worry about. Plus the place that we're traveling through in space is affecting the Earth and it's taking stuff out. And they're like, how did an M-class do that? And here's what it's doing. When those flares come out, our sensors say that the sun has a drop in activity or a drop in solar output. But then when that does something to the Earth and it's causing problems here, they're trying to blame it on climate change that's man-made. But now they're saying, they're finally admitting to the fact that no, we calculated this wrong. When there's a lower output, solar output, we're finding that that's when these coronal mass ejections are coming out and it's hitting the Earth even worse than before. And even an M class, it used to take an X class to 100 power to really be something to be concerned about. Now a low M class is destroying stuff. So I'll let her finish. And
For all that magnetized plasma from the sun to hit the surface of the earth and, course through the electrical grids that we've set up. The electrical, it's almost like a cocoon that we've set up that protects us from non-electric life. Like it's our almost like our central processing system.
It's a big antenna.
And it can be very badly affected by all these solar storms. So the concern is over how vulnerable all these electric and electronic systems are to solar storms when the field is reversing.
And we don't know the answer to that question.
We don't know the answer to that question.
And do we have a sense about when we should start to be on the lookout for that kind of thing happening?
Well, scientists are saying, and
she trips over her stuff.
Scientists are cautious people, but they're saying we should start to think about how tightly interconnected the grid is, our electrical grid with our, say, nuclear power stations, how interconnected that has become over time. We've built up this whole electrical infrastructure.
See how she danced around it? Listen, she just published a book now, and she's saying, well, scientists want to, be conservative, and they don't want... She's dancing around it. It's happening now. That's why they just did this. This video dropped. I'll have to look at the exact date. I'll show you in a second, but this is recent compared to what she was saying before about, oh, well, it could happen at some time. Here's the problem. We are measuring a grand solar minimum right now, measuring our Earth's protection against anything in space, not just the sun, but other rays, and we're coming up with we have such a drop that if it even drops, I think they said by 10% more or something, that it could put us at a level where we could get more cancers and die from it. But any coronal mass ejection, especially one like the one that we just missed, if we had been I think they said 3 months ahead of time or 3 weeks ahead of time in our orbit? I think it was 3 months ahead of time in our orbit around the sun. We would have hit that one, and it would have destroyed everything, because our all of it would have caused even fires, ground level fires. Our magnetosphere is that weak, and it was a huge one. But even M-class ones are messing with us. I'll play this again though.
Detecting us. The magnetic field has been relatively
I'll have
strong.
links up to all
it's
this.
It's weakening now, and it's becoming
continually.
much more interconnected, and we're becoming much more dependent on it, and on satellites, for example, which are also vulnerable to magnetic storms as the field weakens. And so, scientists are saying, with an eye to caution, we should be thinking about how interconnected these are, figuring out how we can, predict storms more accurately, how we can, solar storms meaning, and how we can, harden our systems against these magnetic surges that will come.
That's what I was going to ask. Should we be doing anything about this now?
They think we should, yeah.
As of now?
Yeah.
Like what?
Well, trying to figure out how to harden up the grid so that they're not as affected, or how to make them so you can shut parts of them down. If you know that a solar storm is going to hit a certain latitude, could you shut down some of those electrical grids on that system so that they don't just...
Okay, I'll put a link to this later. She's not telling me
I can't even imagine whose job it would be to sort of be responsible for that. Do you know?
No. There are some international bodies that have been set up essentially in the wake of a big... we had a huge solar storm in 2012, July 2012, which very few people know about, because it happened that the Earth was not facing the part of the sun that had this immense solar flare, but it was one of these...
We just had another one.
Superstorm, a super magnetic storm.
Yeah. Okay. Look, let's get past that and see if they get into something else. I'm going to change it from this.
Say to Greenland, or so the Denmark.
Okay, I'm gonna put this on pause. I'm gonna go to the other one. Nobody likes her haircut anyway. Look, check this out. Here's what we got going on. This next one will explain it better. Let's see about this one. This is Nova. When did they let this out? That was back in 2012. I'm just going to put a link to that one. This one that I'm wanting to put on here, let's find it real quick, because I put it in a playlist. All right, let's see here, and then I'm gonna get off this thing. I just wanted to show you the intel that you should have, that they're not giving you in mainstream news, so that you'll have it, so that you can understand what's going on when we do lose power and when they do all these shutoffs. But let's see here. Right. This was part of it. Let's see, that was when And the polls flip. Tech Insider did one on it too. I've got so many here, I might just drop a whole playlist on it.
It was the largest Atlantic storm ever.
Let's
by
see.
gale diameter,
M5 flare.
where they used the total solar irradiance.
Let's see if I can find where this guy gives a conference in
Mostly
Canada.
region here, we're going from 20
Of those big time typhoon records,
from El Chicon 83 to 86 and Pinatubo 92 to 94.
Okay. This is solar forcing of severe storms, and this has got something to do with I mean, right now we're getting even tornadoes in the late into the day here as far as our year. This right here.
so look at what happens when the sun fires off and when the sun affects Earth in terms of the tropical activity. The KP8, the level 4 geomagnetic storm of this summer, was followed just days later by 6 cyclones popping up in the Pacific. And that one just to the northeast of Hawaii did not hit the requisite strength to be classified in this way, or else it would have been the first time in recorded history of there being 7 in the Pacific. As I mentioned earlier, this was also the earliest example of 3 typhoons forming in the Western Pacific. In 2013, we had an X-class flare and magnetic crochet, very rare event. This is when the solar flare is so powerful that strong electric currents actually get surged through Earth's atmosphere.
The reason I'm showing
Now,
this is
this
because of the
happens when the
history of this.
CME impacts Earth. The auroral electrojet starts firing up with the northern lights, and that induces currents. And just days later, we have Typhoon Haiyan.
I've got to get
Now,
his
when
name.
you talk about
See if he's got anything
the,
new or
the
out.
typhoon records that are the big boys, you know, strongest storm, lowest pressure, fastest winds, largest area. Every single one of those big time typhoon records are held by either Haiyan or Typhoon Tip, which occurred in October at the exact peak of sunspot activity back in 1979. And although we don't know what the flaring was like, we have some idea of what the auroras were like. We can say definitively that for the year 1979, statistically, the greatest chances for significant space weather occurred at the exact time Typhoon Tip formed. So, can you guys all see the timestamp down there? Is that sticking out to you guys at all? So we had very, very quiet space weather actually for days and days and days. And then all of a sudden, the sun woke up like crazy. A ton of CMEs. Now, none of them were coming at Earth, but these were the type of tight, coiled CMEs that you often see really perturbing the inner heliosphere. And of course, this occurred, as I heard somebody say, exactly at the start of Hurricane Katrina. And it ended right about the time it hit its peak strength. The last time we had an X10 solar flare or higher was just a few days after that event that caused Katrina, and that was an X17. And the mid-month storm outbreak was the very last time before this summer that we had 5 Pacific cyclones at the exact same time, a very significant outbreak.
But our magnetosphere
The
was
last
stronger
time we had
than.
a near major solar flare was an X9 in 2006. We had the Hanukkah Eve cyclone strike Washington. If anybody's familiar with that, it was one of the strongest storms to ever hit the state of Washington. And to set a rain record in Seattle is no small feat, I have to tell you. Interestingly, that sort of very odd track that Hanukkah Eve storm took is very similar to Oho, which formed at the exact same time as Joaquin and the Metacane. And this is what Dr. Uyen mentioned, and it took a track that was very, very similar to the Hanukkah Eve storm. It hit the Canadian coastline a bit further north, but it's very interesting to see 2 very rare storms. And this late in the season, you don't see a Pacific hurricane swing up and go at BC like that, British Columbia. And we've seen it twice immediately after significant solar events. Hurricane Sandy. This was about the only solar uptick for about a month before or after Hurricane Sandy. And it just sort of came and went in the period of a week, where out of nowhere we jumped up from B and C class flares up to M and X class solar flares, including a very large coronal mass ejection, which was not aimed at Earth, but as we've learned, they don't have to be aimed at Earth to perturb us. And that was, of course, when Hurricane Sandy sort of came up and did its thing, and it was the largest Atlantic storm ever by gale diameter. So let's come back to this. And I was speculating that the melted power line and the electrical explosion just a few miles away in Washington state, along with the transformer fire in India, were very good candidates for space weather-induced disruptions on the ground. Now, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to speculate, if the atmosphere could give us a hint, anything to tell us that, hey, wait a minute, yes, there is a disruption in that particular part of the world, Washington state and India. Well, Mumbai is where the transformer blew, is directly to the east of that cyclone that formed that day in the Northwest Indian Ocean. And that was the tropical storm we just mentioned coming up towards British Columbia. Those were, at that time, two of the more significant tropical events on the planet. And just to the east of each of them is where we saw the best candidates for the space weather-induced activity.
That full presentation back in 2015 covered many more
All right,
events. But
check
now
this
let's
out.
jump to some.
So here's the problem. All right. I'll put a link up to all this when I'm done. The problem is that now, and he does another video, I've got to find that guy's actual original video. The problem is that now even M-class flares are causing disruption when we get hit, not if, but when we get hit by a X-class flare, and it won't be long. Mathematically speaking, it's been everywhere, shooting at every direction except for in our path of orbit. It's likely to be soon. They will have to cut off the power for about 3 days, and then we'll still see damage to what it does to our satellites. Like I said, this is kind of quickening. This with our pole moving the way it's been moving in the direction of Siberia for a long time, but for that lady to get on here recently, and she's just dropped this book, she's hoping people buy that book off Amazon before there's no Amazon, you know, when there's no internet. And everybody's talking about whenever it all gets cut off, it could easily be cut off. This is another climate forcing. Let's see here. See if I can find it. I may just be shutting this live down real quick, but I wanted to see if I can find more info on it. Let's see. Twice as many CMEs. Let's see what we got.
Is tight and flat up at the poles. When we
This is this guy that
Consistent with some ideas that were floating around in the 1980s
let's see.
the storms, and that changes the
This
current
was
coming
put
down the
out
surface, and that
August
can be
28,
detected by electric
2019.
field.
Canada, Europe, Israel have now come assume
Let's see.
equations of joules.
I'm looking to find it.
Pretty much for stratospheric aerosols if you're looking over the long term.
It gets better. Not only are these found
Let's see.
actually get surged through Earth's atmosphere. Now this happened. So, interestingly,
That's another part of that same video.
we saw the best
Low
candidates.
pressure.
during the current record strong El Niño salinity.
Okay, can't locate it. I've got to find that guy and what his channel's about. I'll put up links to everything. I'm going to drop this as a video and get off here, but people, I just want you to know that we're being conditioned towards a power loss event.
I assure you.
And it's because our magnetosphere is weak. We are we're not impervious to even our own sun, much less everything else. And trying to see where they've got a record of the last one. Let's see. Oh, this was what he was talking about. This is here we go.
That this solar event was major. It turns out that
1 second. One of them burned up the solar
caused these
plane
disruptions
batteries.
all over the place. But when the magnetic storm ends,
Let me get this here. I will show you a little bit more here.
directly at Earth. What you're looking at here is a coronagraph image, and the reason
This is one.
59 again. What are they going to do?
It was
with
1859.
ventricular dysfunction.
That's
So
when they were
Surprise
talking about it. Okay, here we go, because this is a fact that was brought up by NASA, NOAA, ESA, and IPS. It's been long acknowledged. This is not new. Okay, it says right here, solar storms could destroy the global power grid, not just California or anywhere else. The fact has been long established by NASA and NOAA. Now watch this right quick, if I can find that one that shot out, and then when he's talking about this other thing. 5% prepared. We're not even that much prepared. And keep this in mind, keep cash on you anyways, because if you have a power outage, you can't buy anything. Chaos. That tells it. If we had hit that same
how
storm,
close we came to a major solar disaster.
if we had hit that same one today with our magnetosphere being where it's at and the pole going towards Siberia at the rate it's going, forget about the pole shift, just about our magnetosphere being weak, it would have took out everything. Electrical would have caught on fire, everything, because it's bombarded by all those high energy protons, even in the gamma spectrum. We'll play this some more.
What I'm talking about is what happened at the end of June earlier this year. We came closer than I think anybody really realizes to having major issues. And since I initially started making this presentation, I've had to update it every single month. In fact, I was updating this presentation.
I've got to get
just
this
this
guy's
past
name for
week,
you so you can Google
because I
anything
had
he
to.
talks about,
The
because he's
sun
on top of it.
and its interaction with
He's
the Earth was
pretty much on the
producing
same
effects that
wavelength I am, it
I
seems like,
promise
on
you are
studying
not
this stuff.
supposed to be seen with this level of effects. Let's take a look at this right now. So if you guys remember, if you were watching, in late June we had a little uptick on the sun. A number of solar flares and coronal mass ejections were released. They were released from this sunspot. It has a beta, gamma, delta magnetic classification. And the important part of that is where the blue and the red are colliding over on that one side, where you can sort of see that circle with the negative. That's actually my cursor. As you guys know, if you've seen the Sun series or if you watch regularly, where we get that blue positive and that red negative colliding in close quarters in the sunspot, that's where you're likely to get the flare energy, or at least the destabilization event that sets off a solar flare within the sunspot. You may also remember, thank you, Trevor.
This
You
one.
might also remember that these coronal mass ejections, a number of them were fired directly at Earth. What you're looking at here is a coronagraph image, and the reason why we have a circle in the center appearing to sort of block things is because if we didn't have that circle in the center there, the sun's glare would completely wash out.
Now today they would have
the
been
image. This is a
calling
very
that a kill
sensitive
shot.
camera. It's meant to pick up all those little lines and all those particles of ejecta, those charged particles in the coronal mass ejection. And so what you're seeing here, when it looks like this, we call it a halo eruption. This means that it's coming right at Earth, because when there's an eruption on the sun and you have a satellite that's looking directly from Earth, it's going to expand as it comes towards you and look a little bit like a halo. Well, that's exactly what happened in late June. And after a year of coronal mass ejection impacts, we saw what equaled the largest geomagnetic storm of this entire solar cycle. You're seeing that as the red spikes on the right side. This is known as a level 4 geomagnetic storm, G4. And we have only had a few of those in this solar cycle. What you see over to the left You see the blue and the red curves, and what that is that's known as the magnetometer. And to simplify, that's checking to see what sort of disruption there is in Earth's protective magnetic shield, the magnetosphere, due to space weather. And as you can see, there's a pretty good ding right there. Most of the time, even when we get a strong impact from the sun, we do not see these curves dip into the negative. And in fact, what this means, and I've only seen this 2 other times with solar events, is that for a brief period, about 2.5 hours, this coronal mass ejection impact actually whipped around and reversed the magnetic field for a little bit.
It reversed it, made it
Technically, when
negative.
the magnetic field readings are at 0, technically, there is a large part of Earth's shield that was magnetically neutral and letting solar plasma pour right into the atmosphere.
All of it, it sucked it in.
And so this is a fairly significant event. Now, what did we have going on during this event? At the peak of the storm, nearly simultaneously, these happened minutes apart, the entire aviation radar system of New Zealand went down, which is one of the things you look for when you have a solar event.
Something he doesn't
And the
know
FNB
about at
digital
this
banking
point,
system, which is
something he's not mentioned because he didn't pick up on it, was Israel lost their GPS a while back, not too far back, and it could have easily been caused by the solar event that was happening at the time, but they haven't correlated the two, and he didn't talk about it. I noticed
national
it.
banking system in South Africa also went down. These happened within minutes of each other at the peak of the geomagnetic storm. Now, the interesting thing, when you have the geomagnetic storm, that can induce these electric currents and cause these disruptions all over the place. But when the magnetic storm ends, that is not the end of the story, not by a long shot. You see, that energy starts coming down layer by layer if it doesn't immediately get funneled down into the Earth through the magnetic fields. And so after we see these geomagnetic events, the place you look next for disruption is the atmosphere. So just a few days after this event, the solar impulse plane, I don't know if you guys know about this.
That plane,
it's
the batteries got shot.
Solar-powered airplane. It was making a flight
And
from
they were
Japan to
covered.
Hawaii, and it fried its batteries as it went through the
They were
atmosphere.
protected from that.
They made special considerations for this in the manufacture of the plane and in the housing of the batteries specifically to guard against this. Now, why do I say that there's a chance this was related to the solar event? Because this is exactly where the atmospheric disruption occurred after the geomagnetic storm. We had 6 tropical cyclones pop up in the Pacific Ocean, and there was one of them that was a strong candidate. We almost had 7, and that has never happened before. There have never been 7 simultaneous cyclones in the Pacific Ocean, at least not during the time that we've been watching. But indeed, there were 6 within just a few days after that, and as you can probably tell, this is the wind map, and the cyclones are the tight circles where it spins in. And I've got the precipitable water overlay on here so that you see some white and some light blue crowding the tropical storm. So you can really pick out where those tropical storms are. Now, the solar impulse plane, when it's fried its batteries, it was going from Japan to Hawaii in the exact area where 4 or 5 of these storms can be found. Is that definitive proof that the solar impulse plane frying its batteries was triggered by the sun? Absolutely not. But there are some coincidences you shouldn't write off as being, oh, that's just a coincidence. Things like this, we may never actually find out one way or another with 100% certainty. But things like this stay on the radar. So we had the ground events in New Zealand and in South Africa during the storm. And as that energy was, as expected, coming down through the atmosphere, we saw the solar impulse plane fry its batteries, and further indication that a lot of that energy that hit Earth and caused that storm was heading into the Earth through the atmosphere right in this general area. And as you can see, this 6 tropical cyclones hadn't happened since 1974. Before that, you got to go back a really long way. And this was the earliest formation ever of 3 typhoons in the Western Pacific. Keep this slide in mind because we're going to see it again tomorrow afternoon. Further evidence that this solar event was major. It turns out that at the time that the sun fired these events at Earth, hiding right behind Earth from the sun's point of view was Ceres, the dwarf planet, and directly behind that was Pluto. A few days after Earth's storm, Dawn had to go into safe mode at Ceres.
They all went into safe mode.
And a few days after that, New Horizons had to go into safe mode at Pluto. But the point is that all the ways we have to determine whether or not this was a major solar event are kind of giving us a big thumbs up. We saw one of the strongest geomagnetic storms of the solar cycle, the strongest the strongest disruption on the magnetogram of this entire cycle. Ground events, atmospheric events, and it just so happens that everything on a line from the, with Earth and the sun had some sort of glitch that day. Now, is it possible that Dawn at Ceres and New Horizons at Pluto just coincidentally happened to both go into safe mode in these days following that, and they think they were electrical events? Of course it's possible that it's a coincidence. It's also possible that it's not a coincidence, and the timing of these things tells us a little more. So, I've sort of explained generally what happened, but I have not at all answered the question, how close did we come to actually seeing a major solar event? Well, that question is hard to answer, at least in terms of, what are we 5 away? Are we 10 what away? What units? It's a very difficult question to answer, but when you compare the solar events that just did this to us this summer with some of the other solar events that we're used to seeing, it doesn't paint a very friendly picture. So, what we have here is
this is what I want you to watch. Even this is a
space weather
older
information. We have M-class solar flares, which is where, at least
It's
for
an
me,
older
solar
speech he
flares
did.
begin to get significant. Not
This
all
used to
M
be a
flares are
problem.
significant,
Now
and
this is a
some
problem.
large C-class flares are significant, but at M range is where we start to get significant. And then we have X-class solar flares, which are, X-class solar flares are about 10 times powerful than the M-class solar flare. And we have major flares and mega flares. Just kind of keep this in mind and how much more powerful you get when you move up a level. It's not like you go 1, 2,
Just
3,
to the
4.
10th
You
power.
don't go 1, 2, 4, 8. It's by powers of 10. So, looking back to just the last solar maximum, there were multiple X10 flares, hundreds of X-class solar flares. And there was only, let me go back for a second, there was only that one ground event of all of those in Sweden. Do you guys hear about the Sweden blackout of 2003, the Halloween storms? Out of all the X10 solar flares, out of the hundreds of X-class solar flares, there was only one ground event. Let's come to the first part of this solar maximum, 2011 and 2012. The largest solar flare we have seen this solar cycle was only X6.9. We have not seen any major ground effects from anything in 2011 or 2012, and there was one satellite issue in 2012. If any of you remember the early March solar flares that actually released gamma rays, it was one of the first times we've ever detected gamma rays instead of just X-rays from a solar flare. This event actually took out the SkyTerra station. It was completely devastated by this event in 2012. But still, just very, very few events. In 2013 and 2014, the biggest solar flare we saw was only X4.9, and we saw no ground effects, no satellite effects, nothing. So here we are in 2015, and we've seen something fairly significant. And what we're looking at here, these are all of the solar flares responsible for that huge magnetic storm at the end of June, the one that took out the radar in New Zealand, the one that may have fried the solar impulse plane's batteries. Don't know if you guys can read that, but we have no mega flares. We have no major flares. We have no X-class solar flares. In fact, we don't even have any large M-class solar flares. These are all low to mid M-class range. And yet look what they were able to do to Earth. There's a bit of a disconnect there. This is the solar wind of the major impact that caused the storm. And what you're looking at on the top line, which is supposed to look a bit orange, that is the density of the solar wind. It's relatively dense. The next row is the plasma speed, how fast these particles are hitting. And that's above average speed, but certainly not anything you're going to cry home about. In fact, we had a coronal hole stream just this last week that pushed the solar wind speed near 900 kilometers per second. Here, we don't even hit 800. Down below, there's about a 10x increase in the plasma temperature on the Kelvin scale. With big solar impacts, we can see a 100x increase in plasma temperature or more. And so, somebody like me who has studied every solar event going back as far as they have really been able to track these things, I look at what the sun did with the only moderate flaring. I look at what came in the solar wind, and it's above average at best. And then I look at what happened to Earth, and I say to myself, how in the world did this just happen? What if that was an X-class solar flare? What if those were X10s? Things that just a few years ago we were taking without issue. The idea that Earth is responding to these solar events differently is something we're going to talk a lot more about tomorrow. But let's come back to what's been happening this year. A little bit after I started this presentation, and keep in mind that that KP8 event was in late June and some of the effects bled into July. But in August, we had another KP7 event. This was off even smaller M-class solar flares, even weaker than the ones that we saw in June. At the peak of this storm is when that Washington, D.C. blackout occurred that took out the radar. You guys remember when those hundreds and hundreds of flights were grounded from Virginia and West Virginia and Maryland? That occurred at the height of the storm. And there's absolutely no way that should have happened. In September, we had two separate KP7 events, which is a level 3 magnetic storm. The first one, at the peak of the storm, that transformer caught fire and blew up in Ireland. The second time it happened in September was when we got the San Diego blackout. And you guys might remember, we talked a little bit more about this on our Fly on the Wall podcast because this was a very significant event. The San Diego blackout was not an electrically induced fire or explosion. They actually shut the power off because on their
Did you hear
side,
he said
they could
they
see
shut the power off
energy
because they knew it was
rising
going to happen.
levels that should never occur,
And that was
they
in
had
San
to shut it
Diego.
down or they were going to lose every transformer in their system. Now, interesting thing about this is the peak power plant from SDPG&E,
PG&E.
which means that it
You
is
hear that?
built specifically
This was years back, and
to
a couple years
handle
ago.
those peak power times. You know, in Southern California, when it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon and it's the middle of the summer and it's 110 degrees and everybody is blasting their air conditioning. That's what this power plant was built for. In the evening, in September, when it's not really that warm.
September's what we're
So
looking
much
at.
energy got surging through there at the height of this storm that they had to shut it off. Again, are these definitively solar-induced events? Of course not.
All right,
We
now I'm
will
going to say
probably
something, and
never
I'm going to get
know.
off this part. I'm going to show
But when
something
there's
else
this
here.
many coincidences
All right.
and the timing is this good, we're not talking about
Listen, so this was a couple years ago. This guy did this seminar, okay, or speech, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, and he mentioned PG&E, and that stuck with me for a couple years now, and I'm putting all this stuff together with what the whales came out of the water, I'll put a link to that. The birds going the wrong way, I'll put a link to that guy. He's hilarious too. He's got an awesome channel there. I wish I could remember it. I'll make a comment on it. But here's the point. The point is, they are setting you up, especially in California, because there's nothing to take on those rays. They'll come right across the ocean, just hit the power lines, and there'll be no warning of any other states to the west of there. There's no more states, there's ocean, so they have to know ahead of time they're going to be watching space weather. But now it's even worse, because now, like I said, our magnetosphere is so weak right now because of the pole movement and because of the sun being in a solar minimum, that we're being affected, and it's making us a lot more susceptible to any type of space weather coming from other stars, coming from the place in our orbit around our galaxy center. And we go up and down, in and out of the galactic plane anyway, so we're the bad guys. If we hit another piece of asteroid or something that's just sitting there in the galactic plane, we're the bad guys. We're going up and down, in and out of the galactic plane, quite a few thousand-year cycle. But where we're at right now, going through it, and also going through the part of our galaxy where the center shoots out the gamma rays in a big circle like a donut, coming out and down and around from the pole of the top and bottom of our galaxy, we're getting a lot of radiation anyways. So I'm going to show the part where they said that they're going to shut off power to basically the whole grid, and this was yesterday. So you will see that this is not about a fire season event. This has to do with what that guy just said, and it could be at any point in time. That's why there's a mass exodus of a lot of people selling their houses. They're going up. You look at Zillow and look at the houses. Everybody's saying, hey, my neighbors are all selling their houses, and I'm going to be the only one here. I'm going to have the block to myself until they move people in, because they're moving out. But let's see if I can find that one other one with the news report, and I'll try to put a link to this. Let's see what we got here. It was the actual news report. Where are we at here? Let's see. Back. I'll just add this to that playlist. Add to. Let's not even look at it. Somebody lost the airline. I'm glad they cut that off real quick. That could have been loud. Okay, the pg&e future shutoffs. This is ABC 10 News telling this part, and I've already got it fast forwarded into a bit of this guy's.
Saying, hey, look, we didn't start any catastrophic wildfires, and that was the goal of this thing all along. One of the most fascinating moments to me came when CEO Bill Johnson was talking to the Public Utilities Commission, trying again to pin this whole thing on the weather and not on PG&E's poor maintenance of its equipment.
No, there's nothing wrong with their equipment, is what he says.
Another misconception is that we turned off power because our system is in, quote, shambles.
So if there's nothing wrong with it,
but actually our system is in the vast fire threat areas
you're being conditioned.
We serve is in pretty good shape. And we know this because we just finished an unprecedented inspection and repair process. So it's not accurate to state that the conditions of our system drove this PSPS. The PSPS was driven by a widespread wind event.
That is a really tough argument to make, and frankly, it's fairly
here's another
easily
thing. So before they had a legal argument, because judges were on the bankruptcy side saying that they would have to lean more towards cutting off power, but they didn't cut off the main transmission lines. That's why rich people on the other side of the mountain had power. So they never really did cut off the transmission lines, and it was people working on the transmission lines that started the Paradise Fire. They were working on them. They're made to stand up to all that stuff. Wind won't mess with them, and they've just did an inspection on them, and everything's good. So what will the next power outage be from? It will be an overabundance of caution of space weather, because our magnetosphere is shot, and it'll probably still pop the transformers, because they could be charged just like those old telegraph lines from above. So we'll go further with this, and then
Consider the fact that this year's shutoffs are different than ever before. This year, PG&E added in those big high-tension lines. They're called transmission lines. Those are the backbone of the electric grid, and they're simply not supposed to be vulnerable to wind damage, as we heard from CAL FIRE's chief in our recent series, Firepower Money.
They're not.
Transmission lines are very, very resilient to most conditions, and they're built to withstand extreme winds, and usually they're not a cause of large damaging fires.
It's not the kind of thing you would expect to happen.
It's not the kind of thing that we would expect to happen.
One really astounding thing about what PG&E is saying that really didn't get a lot of play in the meeting is in their written comments to the PUC. The commissioners wanted to know, how big could one of these shutoffs actually be? The answer from PG&E,
everybody,
the entire grid, all 5 million plus customers, which represents some 16 million people. That's how big PG&E is.
I'm going to play that again in case anybody's half asleep right now, because it is kind of late. I want you to see this. This is the whole reason I did this.
16 million people. That's how big PG&E's monopoly is.
People.
It's just smaller than the state of New York.
Everybody awake now?
It's highly unlikely they would ever have to do a shut-off that big.
Highly unlikely.
But it's possible, and out of a, quote, abundance of caution, they're making plans to be ready to do it just in case.
They're planning. They're planning. Well, they're saying future fire seasons. No. They had to shut it off the one time. Remember, like the other guy said, they had to shut it off because they started to see the power go up, and it was in like, when was that? October? Like I said, maybe it's November. What? They have done this before and given their previous, I mean, look, Enron, they did it on purpose to make the money go up, but this guy they're conditioning you, they're making you ready. Hey, we could cut off everybody's power, and that's a normal thing. It's really not a normal thing, but our magnetosphere is shot. We're not protected from space weather, and because of all the coronal mass ejections that have been happening, even with us being in a solar minimum, all it takes is an M class to take us out now and be a kill shot. They're expecting it. They're not going to tell you about it. They're going to tell you why. That's just like before them shutting it down and saying it's wind. Wind doesn't make fire. It takes fire to make fire. A spark. You need an oxygen. You need a ignition source, spark, and then you need fuel. Well, the fuel's there because it's all dry, but it takes a lot. They had a couple of, one guy was a farmer who was on a tractor. I don't believe that because they never showed the farmer or the tractor. They caught it in one little place, caught on fire. Another was, out of all the time that the power's up and it's been a drought for so long, no, if you're not working on the transmission lines and you don't cause a fire while you're working on them, you're not going to have a problem with power lines causing fire. They messed up. So if they cut the power and it's not even supposed to be fire season, see, they're planning for this. So you should plan for it too. People, I'm going to get off this thing. I just wanted to put this up. 16 million people. It says PG&E future shutoffs could cut power to 16 million. They finally admitted, by the way, on another one that it was 3 million people. Because if you have the first 500,000 and they had 800,000 after that they decided to cut more, even 500,000, there's 3 people in each house. That's 1.5 1,500,000 people, because they're counting customers. They want it to be a lower number, so they're calling it customers. So y'all stay safe. I'm gonna get off this thing. They're talking about shutting off everybody's power when this happens, and it still may fry the grid. They're not going to admit to it being for a power event, but that other guy said they shut one off before for a power event. This is a precursor of what's to come, and they can cut your power at any time they want. But I think that's for all states. I think that any of them can do this. And I'm sure they would to try to save their system. It would be a 3-day event. And then if it fries everything, it'd be 10 years to get the power cut back on. Because we don't have the transformers. We don't have the bigger transformers for the substations. And it could also fry the wires. So, you know, y'all stay safe. I'm gonna get off this thing. I want to put this out here. You know, subscribe, click like, share, do what you do. Y'all stay safe. I'm out. Peace.